I've done that. That might sound crazy to somebody when I say I've done that, but it isn't crazy. I really sleep well at night, and it cost me $2,000 or $3,000 so that I can sleep well at night. And in terms of my overall life, that wasn't a very high price to pay so that I could say, yeah, I don't want to go out and stand in line at a grocery store with a bunch of angry people waiting in line to get food. I've solved that problem. I've got some freeze-dry food that if I hit that spot, I've used that freeze-dry food on fishing trips and hunting trips up in Alaska, and it's great. So that would be a second answer to you, Kevin, that I think food reserves are very important. What other thoughts do you have?
I can definitely attest to the fact that you're not a doom and gloomer. I mean, as long as I've known you, you're always looking at whatever the situation is right now, and you ask yourself, what's the opportunity? One of the phrases I've heard you say over and over and over is, hey, this is a game. Let's play it.
That's right.
You're always just looking for what the rules of the game are at the time. I have to just share with you that I really appreciate that, because I think sometimes people say, oh, well, that's just what gloom and doomers do, or doom and gloomers do. They label it so they don't have to take responsibility for the rule change in the game. It's not necessarily what doom and gloomers do. It's what people who are paying attention to the detail of the day.
I was thinking about this, and I want to work this in because I think it's so important. We have $110 trillion of current and future debt in the United States of America. That's a given. You can get that off the grandfather network, or you can get that in a number of places. But if you really look at people who add up what this country's accrued, it's $110 trillion in debt. Any reasonable man or otherwise, if they sat and thought about that for 3 minutes, would understand you can't pay that off. We don't have it. I can't go out and earn it. You can take everything I have, and you're still not going to have anywhere near the money to pay off $110 trillion. So there's just honestly two answers. One of them is to totally default on all government debt tomorrow morning and say, I'm not paying any money back on T-bills, Treasury bills, or any of the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac paper. Game over. Don't pay back the money. The other alternative you have is to say, I will inflate my way out of this. If I owe $1 today, if I can reduce the value of $1 to a nickel, I might be able to wiggle my way out of this problem. Now, we've talked about that, but maybe we haven't talked about it enough. Those are the only two solutions to America's problem. Sorry. I would challenge anyone to give me a third solution to where our country sits today. So if you know that, then these decisions we're talking about become fairly simple, really.
Well, Pascal, an old mathematician, had a wager, and it had more to do with religious faith. If God exists and you don't believe in him, there's a lot to lose. If he does exist and you do believe in him, you've gained so much, and your life has been well lived in the process. So what do you have to lose in the equation? Using that kind of logic, kind of a Pascalian wager, when you look at tangibles, when you look at taking practical steps to preserve wealth, or even, as you say, Jim, you don't want to stand in line with an angry crowd.
I'm over 70 years old. Do I really want to stand in line? If I were you, David, and had two young kids like my son does, would I really want to go down and stand in line at the grocery store for an hour and a half to get food for my family? No, I can do that, and you and I have been in lines before. Who wants to do that if they don't have to, right?
Right. It seems like it is that equation where if you're wrong, what have you lost? Very little. If you're right, what have you gained? Perhaps the opportunity of a lifetime, not only in terms of asset preservation, but in terms of the role of leadership that you can play in your community, helping rebuild at the end of a 2 to 7 year period.
I think that's right.
So it is interesting, Jim, as you and I have gotten to know each other better, and as we talk about the transitions ahead, it is important to recognize trends, as we've been discussing continually, but also the things that change those trends on a dime and turn them, take us in a totally different direction. That's largely what Wall Street has missed.
You know, I can bring up another subject, which is the same as what you're talking about. There was a great guy who wrote Was Green. He believed in the fact that we would run out of everything. He had the Malthusian theory. His name was Dennis Meadows, and he wrote a really interesting book back in the 70s about the fact that most of the raw materials in nature would all disappear in the next 10 or 20 or 30 years. But I'll never forget reading his book, and I don't know where this thought came from in his book, but it was there. He said, you know, at one point in your life, if you lived in Holland in 1939, if you lived in Holland and you were a Dutchman and you lived in Holland in 1939, you had about 6 months to make up your mind. You could decide to leave Holland because you could see what Hitler was doing and what the Stukas were doing with their dive bombing right next door, and you knew they were coming your way, and you could leave Holland and move to America or to England, or you could stay in Holland and eat tulip bulbs for about 6 years. And, you know, I guess you could do either, because after 6 years it was over. I guess that's the whole point. But you do get a choice to decide, you know, how you want to experience that 6 years, right?
I hear you.
Yeah, and Holland was not the best place in the world to be during that 6 years. I know that Barton Biggs wrote about that
Well, my son says that isn't so bad. Then I said, well, then read the Diary of Anne Frank and tell me about it,
Yeah, probably best to take notice and take action. Well, Jim, we sure appreciate you joining us today. We would like to have you on a regular basis, and I know David and I, when we finish talking to you, we know that we get a lot of calls right afterward, the last program that you were on. We probably had more calls coming in after that program asking for the report that you had written than we had up to that point. Jim, you're going to be writing on some subjects here over the next couple of months. Can you give us a preview of coming attractions?
I've got two amazing things that I was just sending in, and they're amazing to me. I don't know that they're amazing to McAlvany and whether they'll even see the light of day, but one, of course, is what we've just talked about this morning, that hyperinflation is real and is happening. And if you remember Rhodesia, which we go back and look at for a moment for people who aren't familiar with it, to tell you just exactly how it feels to live in that right now, today. And then secondly, the really simple answers there are just to take precautions now, and what you have to do. You have to think ahead in order to do these things. And the risks, as David has pointed out, of doing these things seem to be minimal at best. I mean, there isn't the risk of losing everything if you're wrong. The risk is that, I don't know what the risk is on the downside, not very much. And so those are there. And then the other thing, which one of our other interested parties, John Leffler, wrote an amazing article, I thought, last week on socialism, and the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac stuff that came out a week ago, many of the really fine conservative writers all of a sudden swung to socialism and what it will mean in America. So that's another article that's in the mill right now and coming out. And the fascinating part of that is that we addressed that subject back in the year 2000, and if you looked at what we wrote back then, it's really intriguing. It's very interesting.
Well, Jim, thanks for joining us today, and appreciate the positive outlook, looking at the next 2, 5, 7, 10 years, and knowing that we will come through, and there's some practical things that we can be doing now.
Hey, well, thank you. I appreciate being here. I really enjoy it. It's fun. Hope you guys have a good day.
Thank you, sir.
Well, once again, you've been listening to the McAlvany Weekly Commentary. I'm Kevin Orrick, along with David McAlvany and our guest today, Jim Deeds. David, I just wanted to remind the listeners one more time that we're inviting anyone and everyone who can come to the Overland Park, Kansas conference that you all will be putting on Thursday, August 7th at 6:30 p.m. at the Doubletree in Overland Park. That's at 10100 College Boulevard in Overland Park, Kansas. We're asking that if you think you can come, to give us a call at 800-525-9556 to just reserve your reservation to come to the conference. It is free, but we would like to know how many people are coming. You can also visit us at McAlvany.com. That's McAlvany.com. And then also one last mentioning of the DVD. David, we've gotten just a slew of calls ever since this DVD has come out. We'd like to offer that for free to our listeners. They can call us at 800-525-9556 to request one, or if you have friends, 2 or 3 DVDs. Please give us a call. We'll be happy to send that to you as well for free. And that also is a recording of these conferences that you and your dad have been going out. And it's an all-new format, all-new series, and just the steps to take this year versus last. So thanks for joining us. I'm Kevin Orrick, along with David McAlvany.
This has been the McAlvany Weekly Commentary. The views expressed should not be considered to be a solicitation or a recommendation for your investment portfolio. You should consult a professional financial advisor to assess your suitability for risk and investment. Join us again next week for a new edition of the McAlvany Weekly Commentary.